You've heard of hangings, beheadings, maybe even the rack, but few punishments in history are as terrifying, as excruciating, and as deliberately horrifying as this one. Boiling in oil. Ugh. It wasn't fast, it wasn't clean, and it certainly wasn't merciful. This is not a myth. This is real history, and today we're diving into one of the most gruesome execution methods ever recorded, used in Europe, Asia, and beyond. A punishment reserved for the worst criminals and the most symbolic messages. Section 1. What was boiling alive? Boiling alive, also called boiling in oil, boiling in water, or even molten lead in some records, was exactly what it sounds like. The condemned was lowered into a cauldron of boiling liquid, sometimes water, often oil, sometimes tar or lead. They weren't always dropped in instantly. Many were lowered slowly, inch by inch, limb by limb, to prolong the agony. And this wasn't an ancient legend. It was a real method of execution used across many cultures and periods. While rare, boiling was used with intention, not just to kill, but to make a statement. In England, King Henry VIII passed a law in 1531, specifically allowing boiling as a punishment for poisoners. Poison was seen as a hidden, disapproving, cowardly act, and boiling, a slow and public punishment, was meant to match the crime. One of the earliest victims of this law was Richard Roose, a cook who accidentally or deliberately poisoned food served to a bishop. He was boiled alive in Smithfield Market, London, in front of a crowd. In France, there are records of boiling being used in medieval times, sometimes for coin counterfeiters or repeat murderers. In the Holy Roman Empire, certain rulers used boiling in oil or pitch against traitors. In parts of Asia, including Japan and China, boiling punishments were used both in warfare and in justice systems. Some samurai warlords were known to boil enemies alive as a display of absolute power. Even in the Middle East, during some periods of Mongol or Persian rule, boiling was used against political enemies or spies. This was never a standard punishment. It was rare, but when it happened, it was meant to terrify everyone who saw it. The setup was usually public. A large cauldron or iron pot was placed over a fire. Sometimes it was already full of boiling liquid before the prisoner arrived. In other cases, the person was placed in cold liquid, and then the fire was lit beneath them, making the process even slower. Oils were the worst. They heat more slowly than water, but reach much higher temperatures. A body submerged in boiling oil could suffer severe burns within seconds, flesh peeling and blistering away, inhalation of steam and vapor causing internal burns, nerve endings firing continuously until death. Witnesses described prisoners screaming in agony for minutes. Some even tried to push themselves deeper into the pot to end their suffering faster. Sometimes they were tied to ropes or hooked under the arms to be lowered gradually. Other times, their legs or hands were dropped in first, inch by inch. As the crowd watched, it wasn't just death, it was theater. A public warning: the use of boiling wasn't random. It was often justified using religious or moral arguments. For poisoners, it was claimed they had boiled others from the inside, so they deserved to suffer the same fate. For heretics or blasphemers, boiling was a way to purify the soul through extreme pain. For traitors, the slow execution symbolized the depth of betrayal and its consequences. In England, the 1531 law allowed boiling as an alternative to hanging, seen as too quick for the crime of poisoning. In France, boiling was sometimes used instead of burning at the stake. These weren't just about punishment. They were about control, making sure people feared the law, the church, and the monarch more than they feared death. We do have recorded cases. Richard Roose, England, 1531, convicted poisoner, boiled alive by direct order of Henry VIII. Witnesses reported his flesh turning red and sloughing off. A French nobleman in the 14th century was said to be boiled in pitch after forging royal seals. In 1675, in the Dutch East Indies, a captured rebel was boiled alive in coconut oil as a public warning. Mongol rulers used boiling as part of brutal punishments for captured enemy generals, including those from Persian or Indian kingdoms. These events weren't frequent, but they were documented, and they sent a message. What makes boiling alive so terrifying? It's not just the pain, it's the slowness, the anticipation, the helplessness of knowing what's coming and not being able to stop it. Boiling alive turns the human body into a spectacle of suffering. It breaks down the victim's identity, their dignity, and their physical being all at once. There's also something symbolic about being cooked. It turns a person into a thing. A punishment designed not just to destroy, but to dehumanize. Boiling was officially banned in England just a few decades after it was legalized. It was seen as too cruel, even by medieval standards. Other countries phased it out as executions became more humane, shifting to beheadings, hangings, or imprisonment. But unofficially, similar tortures persisted. In parts of the world, people were still boiled or burned in oil as recently as the 19th or even 20th centuries by warlords, rebels, or criminal gangs. The symbol remained, even after the law was gone. Today, the image of a person being boiled alive shows up in horror films, medieval-themed games, cartoons, and myths. But very few realize this was real. Boiling wasn't a fantasy, it was law. It was policy. It was chosen. Some museums across Europe still show iron pots once used for this purpose. And in books on execution history, it's always listed as one of the most feared methods ever recorded. Not because of how often it was used, but because of how deliberately it was used. Boiling in oil was one of humanity's darkest punishments. It asked no questions, it gave no mercy. And when the pot boiled, the screams were meant to echo far beyond the flames. Here's the question. If a society chooses to punish slowly, to maximize suffering rather than simply enforce justice, can it still call itself civilized? Let me know what you think in the comments. For more real history, no myths, no fluff, hit subscribe.